In the year 480 AD, the western portions of the Roman Empire had finally fully fallen to invading Germanic tribes. These Goths and Vandals had set up kingdoms within the Roman Empire decades beforehand, but now they had seized Italy from the Romans. However, the Romans had not yet been lost. In the east, the Greeks still held strong to the imperial ways of the empire. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, wanted to preserve the glory of Rome, and thus sought to restore itself to Rome. The Romans would want to regain this glory by reconquering the old lands back from the barbaric Goths. However, in this pursuit of glory, the Romans would lose more than they gained and pay the price for their hubris. From Greek and Gothic sources, the glories gained from these conquests would be quite boldly stated. However, from the overall outcome, it would be gravely detrimental to all. The Romans would exhaust a large portion of their military, only to lose much they had gained years later. Justinian's conquest of the Goths in the western realm would be detrimental to the Romans, despite his success in restoring the empire back to Rome. The Goths and Vandals were a collection of Germanic tribesmen. Though originally living in Eastern Europe, they gained most of their fame in the West. As the Western Roman Empire collapsed due to their invasion, the Goths and Vandals set up their own kingdoms in these territories. The Visigoths settled in Spain, the Ostrogoths in Illyria and Italy, and the Vandals in northern Africa. These new kingdoms would replace the power held by the Romans in these territories. However, there would be several attempts by the Romans to recapture and control these lands. The Goths and Romans would often struggle and fight over supremacy of the western Mediterranean. The primary battlefield of this would be the Apennine Peninsula. Yet some conflicts would take place in northern Africa, or even Spain. This conflict would come to a peak as the Byzantines would overthrow the Ostrogoths in Italy and Vandals in North Africa, under Justinian. The emperor who would lead the conquest against the Germanic kingdoms, created by the Goths and Vandals, would be Justinian I. Justinian was born in Roman-controlled Illyria, but later moved to Constantinople, after being adopted by his uncle, Justin. Justin would keep Justinian as a close advisor during his reign as emperor. Justinian would rise to prominence within the empire through the military. Prior to the conquest in the West, Justinian was a successful military commander, and because of this, the emperor, Justin, placed him high in the military. Shortly after his rise in power, Justinian married Theodora, an actress and a great influence on his life. However, actresses during this time were almost synonymous with prostitutes. Despite this scandal, he and his empress would have a great amount of power upon his appointment as emperor. Slightly before this, however, Justin was placed in charge of the armies in the east, against the Persian Sassanids in the Caucasus region. Though these wars against the Sassanids, titled the Iberian War after the Kingdom of Iberia, within modern-day Georgia, are often overlooked, they were influential in forming Justinian's credibility within the empire as the new emperor. After the end of the Iberian War with a truce, Justinian turned to other regions in order to gain greater glory. Justinian first sought out to reconquer North Africa. This region hosted the historical rival to Rome, the Carthaginian Empire. However, it now laid host to the Vandal kingdom stationed at the same city of Carthage. Justinian would send his top general, Belisarius, to North Africa in order to defeat their armies, led by Gelimer, the Vandal king. The campaign would see Belisarius lead a navy from the Aegean to Africa, with a temporary stop in Sicily. Belisarius would march his army from the coast of northern Africa to the city of Carthage, as the Romans, under Scipio, had done several centuries ago. After the capture of Gelimer, Belisarius returned to the capital, with great glory and praise. In fact, according to Propinquus, a period of about 600 years had now passed since anyone had attained these honors, except, indeed, Titus and Trajan, and such other emperors had led armies against some barbarian nations and had been victorious. For he displayed the spoils and slaves from the war in the midst of the city, and led a procession which the Romans called a triumph, not, however, in the ancient manner, but going on foot from his own house to the hippodrome, and then again from the barriers, until he reached the place where the imperial throne is. The greatness of this achieved victory would allow the Romans to later launch an invasion of the Apennine Peninsula and destroy the Ostrogoths, as they had the Vandals. After the reconquest of northern Africa, it was only natural for the Romans to want the homeland of their ancestors, Italy. After the removal of Romulus Augustus, the last emperor of the Western Empire, the Apennine Peninsula had been under the control of the Ostrogothic kingdom. This meant that Rome, the namesake city of the Roman Empire, was not under the control of the Romans. Justinian, of course, sought to fix this. However, the Ostrogoths had friendly relationships with the Romans. That is, until the Ostrogothic king, Theodoric, died, and his daughter, Amalasuntha, had been assassinated while in reign. The new king, Theodahad, was hostile to the Romans in their presence, and thus Justinian saw an opportunity to make amends with the past glory and regain the imperial city which now lies outside of the imperial realm. First, he started by securing the island of Sicily in order to have a gateway into the Ostrogothic realm. This effort would be led by Belisarius, the general who had conquered King Gelimer and the Vandals of Africa. In fact, Jordanes stated that this sagacious general believed he could not overcome the Gothic nation unless he first seized Sicily, their nursing mother. The importance of Sicily as a strategic point in the Mediterranean would be realized back with the war between Rome and Carthage. Rome's first conquest must then, therefore, be necessary to reclaim Rome itself. The next step was to cross the straits between Sicily and the peninsula. The Romans crossed the strait under Belisarius and made quick work of the Ostrogothic army. The Romans marched up the peninsula to Naples and then to Rome. After the Romans had returned to Rome, Theodahad was assassinated by Victiges, who would attempt to defend against the reclaiming Romans. Yet, he was unsuccessful in defending against them, and was captured in Ravenna. However, Belisarius left short of full conquest. This allowed the Ostrogoths to make a push back to Rome. The Romans did not let this last for too long and utterly wiped out the Ostrogoths for such an act. The Romans had returned once more to their homeland, yet something was off in a sense. The Roman forces were quite weakened by the back-to-back war with these Germanic peoples, and thus would not be able to mount such strong defense on their now overstretched Mediterranean state. Despite the glories that these wars had brought, the overall effect of them would be a drain to all who partook it. It is obvious that the Goths and Vandals lost great amounts, as their kingdoms were wiped off the face of the earth, with only the Visigoths, who remained in Spain. Yet, to the Romans, this would be almost a Pyrrhic victory, as their hold over their entire empire was weakened. This would be the peak of Byzantine territory, as the empire had expended a great number of forces in order to secure such victories. This meant that their lands would be easy pickings for expanding states to take. This would be seen early on with the Lombards, another Germanic tribe, who would conquer much of the Apennine lands and establish several duchies across the land, as they had been devastated by the war with the Romans. The Romans would only truly hold on to the land in the south and in major port areas. The Romans would barely hold control over Rome for long, with much of the power given to the papal authority, with only nominal control themselves, until Rome itself was just the papal authority's own land. Although Rome had returned to its people, the people had not truly returned to Rome, and thus the power and grandeur of the empire would never return to such a region of the world.